There you go, guys, you're live.
Good morning, everyone. Profound apologies for actually starting quite late today. We had quite a few technical issues, but nevertheless, we are going to start. So my name is Dr. Iwa Salami. I'm Reader and Associate Professor in Law at the Royal Dock School of Business and Law, University of East London. And I am delighted today to be hosting this event, which is our first Center of FinTech Roundtable event. We have, I'll just talk a bit really about what we're going to be doing today. So FinTech, as we know it, is the short form for financial technology, which basically is the application of technology to finance in helping to facilitate the delivery of financial services. And in the way that it manifests itself, it seeks, if you like, to compete with traditional financial services, some of which we're going to be talking about today. So the FinTech Center, the Center of FinTech, was launched in December 2021. And the FinTech Center, the Center of FinTech, is a joint project between the Royal Dock School of Business and Law and the School of Architecture, Computing and Engineering, based at the University of East London. And the idea around the Center of FinTech is to basically leverage the expertise that we have across the two schools in serving, if you like, the very interdisciplinary area of financial technology, which cuts across, of course, finance, technology, and the regulatory aspects, legal and regulatory aspects. So we're leveraging the expertise that we have across both schools from the university. And the aim and objectives really of the Center of FinTech is basically to be a hub, if you like, for all things FinTech research. So a hub for research in FinTech, again, leveraging on our expertise in finance, in law, and in technology. And very closely linked to that is to build a pipeline, if you like, for FinTech talents, which really sits with our work, if you like, or our position within the schools that we represent. So build a pipeline of FinTech talents, and very closely linked to that, quite a few things that we do feeds, if you like, into some of the provisions or some of the programs that we're currently offering, such as our MBA FinTech program and our LLM in FinTech law. We've also got, obviously, those are master's programs. We've also got some undergraduate programs that we are offering in FinTech as well, mostly linked to FinTech in economics and FinTech in accounting, or FinTech with accounting as well. And then thirdly, to engage with industry to provide solutions, again, leveraging our expertise, particularly now from School of Accounting, Technology, Accounting, Computing and Engineering, and providing solutions for industry as they engage in the FinTech space, as well as also monitoring, if you like, the trends in FinTech and providing advice and providing direction as to the legal policy and regulatory requirements needed as the industry advances and emerges. So again, leveraging on the expertise that we have in-house. So today I'm very delighted actually to be to have with us today at the event. We've had, we were meant to have 3 panelists, but unfortunately there have been technical issues and they're unable to join for now. We're hoping that they'll be able to join at some point during the event. And so at the moment we've got Nigel Cannings, and Nigel is the Chief Technology Officer at Intelligent Voice. He has over 25 years experience in both law and technology, and is the founder of Intelligent Voice Limited. and the pioneer of all things voice. Nigel is also a regular speaker at fintech events and quite high-profile fintech events such as the AI Financial Summit. So we're quite delighted to have Nigel here today. And hopefully we would have John Bertrand, who has quite renowned expertise in the banking field, as well as also in the fintech space, having been an executive in Citibank, as well as in FIS Global and SAP Solutions, Software Solutions. We're also hoping to be joined by Colleen Lomahue, who is the founder of Nano and co-director of Nano Foundation, again, who has huge, profound expertise in software engineering, having worked for organizations such as Qualcomm, AMD, Dell, and National Instruments. So we're hoping that they'll be able to join us as we proceed. Okay, but without further ado, since I've got Nigel here, the idea really would be that we have sort of questions to ask. I mean, there's so much going on now in the fintech space, in the fintech industry, and so we have quite a few questions that we're going to sort of ask, and we're hoping that we're going to have a nice, rich, I'd say, conversation now. Hopefully the other participants would join. And I'd also like to say at this point that if you have questions you'd like to put in the Q&A box, please feel free to do so as we proceed. And I think we're going to have more than enough time to actually cover these questions. Okay, so without further ado, I'll just ask Nigel to, introduce himself, tell us what he does, what he's done in the space, and I'll pose my first question. So over to you, Nigel.
Well, thanks very much, Ewa. Thanks for the introduction. And sorry to everyone who's on this who are expecting to see a wide variety of panelists and just get stuck with me, but hopefully we can make this interesting and interactive. As you said, I'm Nigel Cannings. I'm the CTO of Intelligent Voice. I'm actually a lawyer by training, so I qualified as a solicitor, I think, in 1993. And without wishing to put too many people off, decided that being a technologist was a lot more fun than being a lawyer. So I spent about 15 years as a lawyer and then started my own software company. And I've got a profound interest in the legal aspects of fintech and the regulatory side and the software side of it as well. And I kind of straddle both. So a lot of the work that we do at Intelligent Voice is around trying to provide secure systems for people. So speech technology is where we started, but we actually work in the wider NLP space now, natural language processing space. And we use that to help secure communications, to detect anomalies in communications. And those anomalies increasingly are looking at things like fraud. And this is why this is such an interesting roundtable discussion today. So we have installations in large banks, for example. We have installations in insurance companies. We have installations in government, all of which are effectively listening into communications, be that telephone conversations, be that chat communications, email communications, and trying to detect fraud and anomalies from there. So that's just a very brief introduction in terms of what we do here at Intelligent Voice.
Brilliant. So thank you so much, Nigel. I saw that Colin joined us, but he seems to have disappeared. Brilliant. So Colin is here.
Can you guys hear me?
Thank you so much, Colin. And I know you've had quite a few difficulties in joining, but it's so great to see you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys can hear me, right? Just double check.
We can, and we can see you as well. So that's
Perfect.
Absolutely brilliant.
All right.
So, sorry for putting you on the spot. I know you've just joined, but you joined in very good time.
Yep.
Colin, if you just like to tell us, I gave a brief introduction of you, but if you like to tell us about yourself, what you do, and
Yep.
yes, really.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my name is Colin LeMahieu. I'm the founder and a director at the Nano Foundation. I'm a software engineer, but that's always been interested in economics. And around about 2014, I started a digital currency called Nano. So we're working on that. Our goal is to be a global digital currency. And that's what our explicit focus is on. And that's what I've been working on. So yeah, it's good to talk with everyone here.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, so without further ado, I'll start with my questions, actually. So I just wondered, Nigel, just coming to you, you've introduced yourself as somebody that has a background in law, who was a solicitor, and who's also sort of found himself now involved with technology, and now sort of technology focused much more, around sort of fintech products and services. And so I just wondered, though, from your expertise and from your experience, what the specific, if you like, fraud concerns and what you've experienced, I would say really over the past few years, in the way that fintech as a phrase, if you like, has emerged. What your experience has been from the way that fraud concerns, if you like, happen.
Sure. So we tend to look at the human side of fraud. So a lot of fraud detection is done algorithmically. So people are looking for kind of suspicious patterns of trading. So, for example, or money moving in odd places. But we tend to focus on the human side in the sense of interpersonal interactions. And actually, what we're seeing increasingly is that contact centers specifically are significant targets for fraud. Individuals are significant targets for fraud because it's becoming increasingly difficult to defeat machines effectively as the intelligence behind the pattern matching and so on gets better. Our understandings of human behavior from that perspective become better. So what we're seeing is that fraudsters will regularly go into a call center. They will say go into a bank, for example, and pretend that they are the account holder. And we've had occasions of a woman who calls into a call center. She says, I've lost my bank card. There's a recording playing in the background of a crying baby. And the idea is to try and drive agent behavior in a way which is against what they're scripted to do. So, and one of the other things is with the rise of fintech, what we've also seen is this happening with a very unusual background with COVID and the pandemic, because one of the other things that you tend to see in recessionary times is a significant increase in fraud. So every single major recession sees an increase in fraud of one description or another. I think the last recession in the 90s, there was something like a 9% increase in fraud. And that was with a drop of GDP of only about 2%. This time round, with a drop in GDP, which could be 6, 7, 8%, the way things are going, we're going to see a massive rise in fraud. And a lot of it is going to be that either interpersonal fraud or, of course, the big scandal at the moment is the ease with which people were able to get bounce back loans and COVID recovery loans. And that is kind of the ultimate fintech fraud problem at the moment. But yeah, really interesting in terms of where all of that's going at the moment. But I'll let Colin get a word in edgeways.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
Brilliant.
absolutely. In my experience, I think in the cryptocurrency space, it has mirrored a lot of that. There are people that do attack the technology directly, and there are instances of that. But if you go through a lot of the reports of money being moved when it's not supposed to, a lot of it comes down to social engineering. They're attacking the users. either phishing users or other sort of personal individual attacks on the individual and the humans behind it. So and I think especially with digital currency, you have the ability to move large sums of money very, very quickly, but that also means it can disappear very quickly. So focusing on that and not forgetting the human element of the whole chain, the chain is only strong as the weakest link, is absolutely necessary. And I think a lot more focus is going to be going into that area going forward.
Okay, that's very, very interesting. Very interesting response. Quite interesting indeed. And I just wondered, just a quick sort of following up on that, Nigel. So you mentioned obviously that the pandemic, pandemics would usually exacerbate things, if you like. And I just wondered, in this recent pandemic, would you say from the 2-year period, obviously it's really literally almost 2 years now since the pandemic, have you noticed a change in the levels of fraud? And if you have, in terms of sort of the technology geared towards sort of dealing with that, would you say that the technology really is up to scratch?
Oh, that's a big question, that one, because it covers a wide range of factors. I mean, one interesting thing to notice during the pandemic is that the number of prosecutions for fraud have dropped enormously. And let's be honest with ourselves, fraud is really easy, right? I mean, fraud is really, really easy. And it's one of the reasons why you tend to see in bad economic times that fraud goes up. The ability for me to call an insurance company and say I've lost a personal item, so say I've lost my camera, and for them to pay out without the need for any proof is enormous. And you can see the temptation for people who are suffering hardship to say, well, actually these insurance companies, they've got loads of money, I'll take advantage of them. So what we're finding is that the technology does to a degree struggle to keep up with that, because there's kind of two ways that you can look at it from a technological perspective. You can look at it from the pattern perspective. There's this idea of the playground effect, where somebody commits a form of fraud and they get away with it, and then they tell someone in the playground. It could be social media, it could be anything else, but it's known as the playground effect. And what you see is geographical clusters of fraud taking place, where one person has told another, and that's something which insurance companies can now track pretty quickly, because they also track it through social media. And it's little known fact perhaps, but most insurance companies track your social media profile. So if you make a car crash claim, for example, the first thing they will do is they will check to see whether one of the witnesses, the so-called independent witnesses, is a Facebook friend or is some other form of friend. So there's a lot of checking goes into that now to try and determine that. Where the weak link is, and where we work, and we work with some of our partners on this, is again coming back to the human side of it, and this is where I think we're beginning to catch up finally. If I ask you a factual question, you ought to be able to respond to that within a reasonable period of time. If I ask you what your name is, what your date of birth is. So one of the things, and without giving too much away to any fraudsters who are listening into this, but one of the things that we now start to track is responses to what ought to be factual questions. So to see whether someone responds too quickly, so like you've learned it, and if I ask you your name, you start telling me before I've even finished the question, or if I ask you a factual question and somebody takes too long, or they change their mind. If you say, what color was the paint can that you kicked over, in an unexpected factual question, someone says red, oh no, blue. And I know it sounds like a trite example, but actually these are the ways in which we try and kind of trap fraudsters. So it's getting better I would say it's getting better. But when you consider the volume of fraud in the economy is estimated to be somewhere between 140 and 190 billion pounds a year, you know, clearly we're not doing a good enough job yet in terms of tracking that. When prosecutions now are down to, I think, beginning of last year, 140 million pounds a year compared to 140 billion of actual fraud. Sorry, long answer, but it's a really wide question.
Well, thank you.
One thing that stands. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to?
Sorry, go on, Colin.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing that strikes me on this is, for those unfamiliar with, kind of the point of digital currency, in my opinion, is to remove intermediaries in the process of this, and that's beneficial to people that can't get access to the intermediaries. If you can't get access to a bank, however, it also makes you the sole guardian of the data protection and avoiding this type of fraud. So when you have intermediaries, such as banks, you can do these sophisticated fraud techniques because they're not defrauding the end user, they're defrauding the institution. And cryptocurrency moves that that requirement, the security requirement, to the end user currently, because there aren't a lot of cryptocurrency banks, or essentially going back again to having the intermediary there. But that does the function of keeping and safeguarding what you have and keeping it safe. So I just thought it was interesting that a lot of these attacks are on the intermediaries and not necessarily on the end users, but obviously that's there too, the end users.
And thank you so much for that, contribution, Colin, because that really just fed nicely into the question I actually had for you. And really that question really was around the types of frauds. How do you differentiate when it comes to sort of crypto assets, digital assets? I mean, we've seen recently, for example, there's just so many aspects of fraud in the crypto asset industry, but I think one of the ones that I'd like to sort of maybe just pick up from you and to find out how you assess that, and how you're thinking of how the industry is actually emerging and how that would be dealt with. Is the recent, for example, stealing or theft, if you like, of NFTs on the OpenSea, which is the largest market for the sale of NFTs. And yep. one of the big questions everybody is asking, at least those interested in the space, is, I mean, these are huge and significant, dollar equivalent amounts. At what point, that damage, if you like, the credibility of the industry. So at what point, in the way that the industry is emerging, would these types of activities be checked? I don't know if you think about it yourself and how you're assessing things.
Yeah, we do, absolutely. And these things are probably not going to be solved. Well, they're definitely not going to be solved by us alone. It's going to take a lot of people working on it and thinking of it. And we always do talk about this being a nascent industry, even though it's been around for 10 years. It is, like you were saying, there are very high dollar amounts connected to this. There is a very high risk or very high reward if you can successfully pull off these type of attacks. And I think it is going to take a little more investigation and just technology development. Sorry for the background noise, if you can hear it. It's going to take more technology development because it's doing it in a fundamentally different way than existing fintech works. End user has direct access to a lot of money, and because of the way technology works, once an attacker has gotten access to your securables, they can instantly move it out of your possession to anywhere in the world instantaneously. So it's almost like an analogy of a bank robber, where they only have to get into the bank and then they can teleport out instantaneously. So it is a paradigm shift, and it's going to take a lot of people focusing on this, on the security aspect. And then also there's just general, some of these attacks where people lose items, they're not actually fraud or like phishing from someone else. They're technology attacks, and obviously technology attacks are the basic ones that people have to make sure that are not possible. So there's going to be a lot of thinking on it because it is different and it will take time.
Yeah, and just very, very closely linked to that, and I'll come to you, Nigel, very shortly, but very close to what the explanation you just given. People would usually say that, for example, the Bitcoin network is very safe and secure. Okay, people are now saying now, for example, that all transactions that engage or happen on a public blockchain, can be tracked, and therefore really not the best place to engage in fraudulent activities. But then we have all these, you click on this link, assets disappear, you click on that link, basically the technology linked frauds, if you like. I mean, how do you, for the uninformed here, for example, or who doesn't really understand, those two understandings actually seem quite contradictory. So on the one hand, we're saying the system is very secure. On the other hand, we're saying that it's easy for fraud to actually happen. Would you like to just clarify that for?
Yeah, I can expand on that. So when they're talking about these networks being secure, what they're saying is the technology is secure from a cryptography standpoint. So from a technical level, it does things as described. What these attacks are doing is getting the user to do something that they don't intend to do, and they're confusing the user. So they're not actually attacking the technology. These phishing attacks to try to get your Bitcoin or whatever, it's not an attack on the Bitcoin network itself. It is an attack on the user to get them to release information that they shouldn't be doing. Oh, sorry, I forgot a little where I was going with that, but yeah, it's an attack. It's an end user attack. It's a phishing attack. It's trying to get somebody to do human behavior. So the step that gets eliminated in this in the cryptocurrency space is normally if somebody's trying to get money out of your bank account and you're attacking the end user and not the bank, you would convince them to send a wire transfer to this address because you're helping someone or they think it's a business activities, but it's actually in fact a fraudster. But they have to call up the bank in order to do that. And then the bank, can do further fraud checks to be like, are you really sure you want to send this wire transfer to somebody that you've never sent it to before in large amounts? So that gives an extra barrier to it. But cryptocurrency doesn't have that. If they can convince you to use the technology on your computer that has direct access to your money, there's no one else that can help you out currently with that. So I think for a lot of people, yeah.
Thanks. Thank you so much, actually, for just really explaining that it's not the problem really is not with the security of the technology, but actually them, fraudsters trying to get users, trying to defraud users, and not sort of the technology problems with the technology not being robust.
Can I just jump in on that? I know you've got a long list of questions here, but
we'll just go with the flow.
I mean, what Colin raises there is really interesting about the, obviously where I tend to work with the intermediaries as opposed to the end user attacks. But you raise an interesting point there about the ability to the visibility of transactions on blockchain. The fact is you can see where this stuff goes, and I'm sure many people who are listening today are aware of the recent prosecution of Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan, who stole what was then about $71 million in Bitcoin and what's now worth $5 billion in Bitcoin, and they found it almost impossible to launder the money. So they profited very little from it, because it's actually really difficult to hide the transactions. And they ended up doing things like getting $500 gift cards. These people had $5 billion in crypto assets. So and you can't just dump that on an exchange. You can't really turn up to Coinbase and say, I've got $5 billion in Bitcoin, will you convert this into dollars for me? Because you've still got people like Coinbase and so on who begin to kind of democratize a lot of the trading in this, still have anti-money laundering procedures in place. They've still got know your customer procedures in place. So you've got to go to a kind of DeFi place, a decentralized finance place, to try and find a way of moving these things around. So it's actually, not only is there security in the network, going back to the technology side, but actually the transparency of blockchain transactions actually really does help sometimes. Because, frankly, if the scammer that Colin was describing, who says, wire me the money here, actually getting rid of that money, laundering that money, getting it out in cash and moving it around is in many ways significantly simpler than doing it with Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency.
Yeah, so thank you so much for giving us a very good case study on the difficulty. Yes, I totally found the Heather Morgan case quite interesting indeed. But it took quite some time actually for them to be found out, somewhat strangely. So that hack, that hack happened, was it in 2016 of Bitfinex, and obviously the FBI were doing the investigations on the background. But I'll move on to the next question, which is quite an interesting one, and really on identity fraud. And it's to the effect that identity fraud now is growing. It's a growing problem that's massively misunderstood by people in terms of the consequences and its implications. And so do we think that really regulation can actually solve this problem, or would it be a question of us adopting the right technology to deal with this problem, if at all? Or is it education that we need? Should people get more educated in dealing with this problem? Or perhaps actually a three-pronged approach that involves these three dimensions, so regulation, technology, and education. So your take on that would be interesting to know. So Colin, would you like to take that?
Yeah, I could talk about that a little bit. In my opinion, I think it will require a little bit of a technological solution. And what I'm basing that on is, I think most of the ways identities are done now, at least at the government level, are generally, you have a number that you were given, when you were born, and that is a problematic. Am I still connected here? Sorry.
You're breaking up a bit. You're sort of coming in and out. I mean, if you'd like to repeat what you were saying, profound apologies, but we kind of missed a bit of what you were saying.
Okay, yeah, let me say it one more time. So I think it's going to take a piece of technology in order to do it. Usually the way identities are done is, when you're born, you get some sort of identity number, and you use that throughout your life to identify yourself. But that is a problematic way to do identity, because as soon as that number is known, now you're susceptible to fraud throughout your entire life. And it's very similar to credit cards, how they had the numbers on the front. Once somebody knew that number, they could make charges on it. And that's why we moved to the chip-based cards, because you can't just copy something easily observable. You need that chip to do the negotiation. So I think it'll require technology in order to do it. I don't think regulation will be sufficient, or it'll take a lot of effort.
Brilliant. Nigel, what's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I agree with Colin there. I mean, it's got to be a multi-pronged approach, and what happens is every time we find a way we think of securing identity, the fraudsters find a way around it. So everyone thinks they're really safe at the moment with multi-factor authentication. If I get a text message, then that'll be it. But actually, it's quite possible to spoof these things already. With SIM card swap fraud and all sorts of things, to actually find ways of defeating multi-factor authentication. And I tend not to use the text message based ones. I tend to use something which is more linked to a physical device. Now, of course, if I lose my physical device, I've got a problem, but at least it's something which I've always got control over. We do a lot of work actually with identity management and identity fraud using voice biometrics. So again, because we do a lot of work in call centers, and that again is a much misunderstood technology, because people have got this you see on spooks or something that the MI5 pick up this kind of random call from someone. They say, aha, yes, we know who that is. That's Carlos the Jackal, and we're going to go and get him. You know, it's a voice print is a very kind of, it's a lot of vectors. There's a lot of different things that make it up, but we can use it to help target known fraudsters, for example. So one of the big things is using it for known fraudsters, that because what tends to happen again in call centers is you get people who will create multiple insurance policies in different names, and they'll phone up and say, I've had a car crash and claim money. And then next week they'll phone back and say, well, you know, today my name's John Smith. And so we can use forms of technology to help identify previous fraudsters. And, you know, that may also come down to doing video verification as well at some point. Now, you know, who doesn't have a phone on a camera? Who doesn't have a webcam somewhere? And so to do real-time video authentication for identity may be another way of doing it. But actually, I think the biggest thing has to be education. You know, unfortunately, you know, going back to a point that Colin made earlier, that, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of these things are phishing attacks. These are things which are done on individuals, and generally individuals who are very credulous, unfortunately, because, you know, you get a phone call through from someone who sounds quite authoritative and seems to have a few details about you. You think, oh, well, that must be from the bank. You know, first, you know, what's the first thing you do if the bank calls you? You call them back. You know, it's really simple. You know, but you never accept inbound calls from people who claim to be from a financial services company. You know, and it's education which is actually going to help defeat a lot of this, followed by technology. And actually, probably in last place in many ways is regulation, because we know that the types of regulations that we have, the Know Your Customer regulations, and the anti-money laundering regulations, have been frequently flouted in order to allow dirty money to flow through our systems. So actually, it's got to be further down the chain, I think. Sorry, I'll shut up now.
And we don't do ourselves a lot of favors with some of the technologies that are out there. The caller ID, the number ID, many people may not know, but you can completely make that up at a technology level, and a lot of fraudsters do. It can look like it's coming from your bank, and it is entirely not doing that. And also, Nigel, you made a very good point on the SIMs and for text message authentication. I totally agree with you that if you can not use text message authentication in any form, I would definitely stay away from it, because it is possible for someone to call the phone company and convince them to swap your number to a new SIM which they own. They're supposed to guard against that, and then they do a fairly good job, but it does sneak through, and that is actually a fairly common set of attacks on cryptocurrency users. If an exchange authorizes you through an SMS, that has very, very much been a hole that's been punched through in the space. So any users out there, don't use SMS.
Brilliant, thank you. Which is really pretty much a nice segue to the next question I have, which is unfortunately isn't on the list, but is not a very technically difficult one. And it's about RegTech solutions, so sort of regulatory technology, which is sort of using technology really to ensure financial institutions comply. And so I wondered, though, Colin mentioned that there are technologies out there that help manage identities, so identity management and identity control, and obviously, which is one aspect of sort of the focus of regulation, if you like, for financial institutions. But one of the problems I wonder, though, is when you have quite a few of these RegTech solutions, solution providers, and I just wondered if there's a way, and from a technology perspective now, if there's a way to actually assess the various types of RegTech solution providers there, because I'm wondering, are they all going to be robust enough, or should we be having standards for even those RegTech solutions? Actually, Nigel, I don't know if you want to help us out, sort of, you know, answer that question, if you can, please. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. You see, I think it goes back to what I was saying about KYC. So know your customer is really is one of the biggest set of regulations which come around identity management within the space. And yes, there are kind of RegTech solutions for it, but actually they're not really major technology things. What they actually are is a way of outsourcing traditional processes. You know, how do I verify that someone is who they say they are? What it normally means is I've got to show maybe a driver's license, I've got to show a bill, maybe a passport. You know, that's not really technology based. That's just a slightly more automated way of doing a human process. So it does come back to this idea of actually we have to rethink identity. You know, we have to rethink how it is we prove who we are. So there may be a whole bunch of people out there who've got fabulous KYC and other solutions out there who would say I'm wrong about this, but I think that actually, you know, automating a human process to make the same mistakes that a human makes is not a great technological advance. You know, what you actually have to do is start thinking about slightly cleverer solutions. And you know, blockchain is the thing which has been touted for many years as being the way of kind of, you know, having a way of publicly verifying our identities. And I think that there's some merit there somewhere, but, you know, I still haven't quite seen it. So I'm not proposing solutions. I'm here with problems about this. And so, yeah.
Yeah. And on the cryptocurrency or blockchain type solutions to identity, personally, I don't know if those will really solve some of the fundamental problems, because I don't think it's a data storage, you know, replication, redundancy problem, which is what that technology is used for. It's more of a how do you authenticate someone? It's the actual vendor to the end user. That interaction is what has to get seamless. And you did mention standards before, and that one I think is a difficult one to do, because, and paradoxically, I think it might actually hinder some of these new advancements, because if you have to do a specific process for, you know, a regulatory or a standards requirement, if all of a sudden that becomes easily attackable, you know, now you're required to do something that's easily attackable, which is counterproductive. So I think you need kind of that variety of trying out these different technologies in order to get to that, you know, the better idea, and not, I think standardizing too quickly is not beneficial, I guess, if I were to sum it up in a sentence.
Yeah, and actually there is a big push at the moment on AI standards. So the government is actually pushing very hard on AI standards, and they're working with the Alan Turing Institute and BSI to try and implement standards, you know, around AI technology and around this type of stuff. And I agree that in a fast-moving, fast-paced environment, it's actually important to have a level of fluidity there, which enables, you know, and I'm not saying we're going to let the market win necessarily. I would think there's a balance there, but I think the point you make is absolutely right. And what happens is you've got these problems where, you know, someone shouts blockchain, and, you know, suddenly that's the answer to everything. And, you know, it's not. You know, it does what it does extremely well. And there'll be another, you know, there'll be a, you know, someone will shout quantum soon probably, and that'll be the thing that we will hitch onto. But, you know, it is about finding these solutions. So regulation, you know, and I say this with my legal hat on here, you know, regulation is not always the answer to solving human problems. You know, we have to find better ways of doing it.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And Colin, I'd just like to pick up a bit from what you said, just to clarify for our audience, actually. So you mentioned that some of the technological solutions that are relevant or applied in the crypto space, you linked sort of the application of technology solutions around identity to the crypto space. I just wondered if you could kindly clarify that obviously you've got the you know, the KYC AML requirements that centralized exchanges have to fulfill and wallet providers. But then you've also got activities in the DeFi space. So somebody may be wondering, oh, but how I thought they said in this whole crypto space, you don't really need to show who you are. Could you just kindly sort of clarify that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I guess what I'm referring to on that is there have been over the last few years a big flurry in trying to apply blockchain technology to many different areas. And it was just a recurring pattern that I had seen. I went to a lot of conferences, especially government-linked conferences that were trying to figure out what blockchain can be used for. And I definitely noticed that identity was one of the top things that they were looking at as far as a possible technological solution. That being said, I personally haven't seen one that I think is better as a blockchain than as opposed to just a traditional technology stack. I kind of think that one is actually, we're going to revert and just use standard technology on it and probably not blockchains, because I don't think it solves enough of a problem there. But you're right in that a lot of cryptocurrencies and these exchanges don't have identities tied to them. However, other blockchain uses can be tied to identity management, and people have been working on that technology.
Yeah, well, thank you for clarifying. Okay, well, thanks. So I'll move on very quickly because we're just only in the first section. And I know that we've had quite a few questions already, which I'd like to take maybe in the next, I'd say 5 to 10 minutes. So I'll move on very quickly. I think some of the issues we've actually covered. So just very quickly, the next question really focuses slightly on the technology aspect of things and is on the fact that fintech, financial technology, is built on technologies such as machine learning, artificial intelligence, and as we've been speaking about the blockchain. And I just wondered how you're seeing that these, in the way that they facilitate financial services, how differently they do this relative to what already exists in a traditional financial service. Nigel?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm a big fan of AI and machine learning because that's what I do these days. It's honestly, it's transformed the industry. It really has. A lot of the work that we do now around kind of fraud detection, behavioral analysis, and that type of stuff just wasn't possible before the advent of machine learning. And a lot of that is just about how do you find patterns in vast amounts of information. I mean, traditionally, if I look at the way you would have looked at fraud in a call center, and I keep coming back to this, but it's an area that I'm very familiar with. It used to be done with human beings, and what you would do is you would train a human being to listen out for certain things and call different ways of saying things to go through a particular script, but you'd have to retrain them every 3 to 4 weeks because they effectively become blind to what's being said to them. And what people found is either they couldn't hear it anymore, or everything they heard was fraud. It went one of two ways. Now, what we're able to do is, using machine learning techniques, is to take a whole load of markers. You can't just take raw data and throw it into a bucket and say, ta-da, here's the answer. But what you can do is start to tease out different types of behavior, different ways people are acting, different ways they react to things, and use those as inputs to a model where you've got labeled data. We know that call was fraudulent, it's been verified by a human, and we then link a bunch of behaviors to it. You couldn't have done that without the advent of machine learning. Speech recognition technology, something again which I'm very deeply immersed in, has come on enormously in the last 5 or 6 years, because we're now able to take effectively pictures of the human voice using spectrograms and use those in a pattern matching image recognition type of way to turn those into words. Whereas before, everything we built was handcrafted by humans. So what it's really done is it's enabled us to take things which used to be kind of thought up by humans and then turned into code, actually let the machine work it out for you. And so it's a truly transformational technology. But and this kind of goes back to something we were saying earlier, that blockchain was not the answer to everything. And Colin identified that beautifully. Everyone said blockchain, blockchain, blockchain. In the same way, AI and machine learning are not the answer to everything. There's no point in the CEO pointing down the organization saying replace everything with AI and machine learning. It can't work like that. And I'll give a very simple example, and then I will shut up, I promise, that we're in real danger of losing expertise in call center and other types of environments soon. And this will apply across law, this will apply across accountancy, because what we're doing is we're beginning to automate tasks that used to be done by humans, but tasks which we use to train those humans to become more expert. So, if you think about a simple example of, say, take a lawyer, for example. So a lawyer starts off doing very basic tasks. They might be drafting and amending contracts, for example, and they do that and they learn how to negotiate as a result of doing that. But if you turn basic contracting into something which is done entirely by machine, how do you teach someone to become an expert negotiator? You can't, because we as humans learn by experience. So actually there is a dangerous flip side to some of the work that we're doing here, and it should never be forgotten that humans become expert through doing and learning. And if you take the doing and learning out of the equation, because we're never, I think, going to get, and the point I'm really making is that we're never going to generate machines, certainly maybe not in our lifetimes, which have that level of human expertise and creativity and understanding. But we might, if we're not careful, lose the humans who can do it as well.
Well, thanks so much, Colin. I wondered if you wanted to contribute to that.
Yeah, just briefly, but I am also very excited about the possibilities of AI. And yes, training those is very, very hard. I think the most interesting thing was the last part of what you said is losing the human expertise in things. I'm not sure how much I've thought about that, but that is an interesting point, because exactly what we're doing with AI is we're saying it's hard for a human to come up with a solution. Let's have the computer solve the solution for us, but there isn't a way to get the information out as to how it's solving it. It is kind of a black box. Especially very large models, they're impossible to actually reason around. You just kind of have to trust that it's doing the thing. You can prove that it's doing it, you can test it, but it's hard to impart that knowledge back into people. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
So thank you too, actually, for nicely balancing it. Those are obviously the criticisms, if you like, of AI and technologies, and even sometimes also technologies such as even the blockchain. We can thoroughly lose the human dimensions, which actually is a nice segue to the next question, which is about disruption. Okay, which is the disruption to financial services from this application, if you like, of technologies of fintech in this way. And a very quick question on that is, to what extent then do you think that these fintech products and services, in the way that they manifest themselves, would be able, to be extreme now, dispense with traditional financial services? Because sometimes if you listen to various aspects of the fintech industry, I mean, you have two extremes. You've got the one extreme that says, for example, banks are going to be obsolete in the next, God knows what. To what extent do you see that happening? As in, to what extent do you think fintech can disrupt these types of services? I'll start with you, Colin.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's always good to start with observing that the current system that we have in the financial sector is very exclusionary. There are 2 billion people in the world that don't have access to bank accounts. And that's in no small part because the cost and the regulatory requirements of doing that doesn't have, a bottom line. It's not valuable to these companies to do it. But we think that they should. So that's the purpose of going in that direction. And that disruption, I think, is very, very good. I think banking, I think banks are going to be adapted to house these digital assets. They're already doing it, and they're moving into banks so that your digital assets can be guarded by a bank. That may seem like a paradox, like you're undoing the exact same thing that you're trying to do, but I don't think it is, because there's many parts of banks. Keeping your money secure on deposit is one part of it, but the money transmitting part is the part that cryptocurrency stands to eliminate, and that is an enormous cost. The amount of expense that goes into it, the delays, and the exclusionary aspect of it is what we can try to get rid of. So you'll be able to, send money directly to people, but when you have large sums of it, I'm not going to keep, if my entire retirement savings was in cryptocurrency, if somebody did that, it's probably not a great idea to store that in your house. You probably actually want it secured by professionals and insured. And I think a lot of people will be doing that. So I think the secure housing aspect of the banking isn't going to go away. I think they'll adapt, but I think where nano and cryptocurrency helps is bringing people in that can't currently get into the banking system in the current way, and lowering costs.
Okay, thank you very much. I have a burning question I really need to ask you following on from that, but I'll ask Nigel to sort of come in here.
Well, I mean, I've got very little to add to that, I think, because it's disruptive and not disruptive simultaneously, in the sense that what it's doing is it's shaking up, it's shaking the financial services industry up. But then, as Colin says, effectively what the financial services industry then does is kind of steals all the best bits, and because they have to, because they're forced to, because the market forces them to, which I think is a fantastic thing. But what is really interesting is this idea of bringing more and more people into the loop, really, because it just becomes so much cheaper to do it, and therefore, ultimately there will be profit in it for banks, and therefore they will bring people in almost by default. So yeah, it's absolutely agree with everything Colin says on that.
Okay, brilliant. But very closely linked to that whole disruption, a lot of the mechanisms through which we're seeing the arguments around financial inclusion, particularly again from the crypto side of things, or the crypto asset side of things, a lot of these approaches aren't environmentally friendly or sustainable. So how do we deal with that? Because on the one hand, we're trying to be juicy, we're trying to financially include people, and crypto is, the arguments around crypto assets is quite big on that. How do we deal with those types of challenges? And I'll ask you, Colin, or Nano.
Yeah, I have the perfect answer to that. Yes, exactly. It breaks down to, it was a technological decision to use these algorithms that consume all this energy. It is a way to do it. It isn't the only way to do it. And I think it's important for people to recognize that cryptocurrency, unfortunately, for us, has become synonymous with energy consumption. But that's exactly one of the things that Nano is targeted to not do it that way, because I am an environmentally minded person. We can't start this new digital money that effectively burns the earth. It's not possible. We have to be conserving what we have. So it just is a simple matter of saying we can get the same effect, digital money, peer-to-peer, decentralized, but it does not have to consume that energy. And then we have to just make a decision to do that. And if people aren't going to make a decision, I kind of predict, I kind of think down the line, there will be very, very onerous regulations that will make it very impractical to deal with these ones that aren't environmentally friendly, if I were to predict.
So very interestingly, actually, yesterday news came out actually that the EU is sort of considering sort of banning proof of work cryptocurrency blockchains sometime in a few years. And very linked to that, I just wondered what your take then is on alternative, sort of much more energy efficient approaches to settling transactions on blockchain, such as through sort of proof of stake. So how do you see proof of stake in a nutshell relative to, sort of using Nano, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, nano, so the technical term that we would use is a message passing system. And that's the way we get all the computers to agree. They pass messages to each other over the internet, and they use that to come to an agreement. The energy intensive ones that we've heard about, proof of work, that doesn't use message passing in the same way. It uses that energy consumption to prove it. So it really is just a matter of a choice. And Nanos chosen to do that message passing mechanism explicitly because the energy consumption and the alternative ways to do it, we don't think is justified. So it is possible. There are other systems, like Nano that use these message passing systems, and they are similar in a lot of ways. So it is possible to do it. We're not the only ones. Yeah, it is proof of stake. The reason I don't use proof of stake, even though I guess maybe I should, since that's the most understood one, is because that has a lot of other connotations around it that we try to get rid of. But the basic thing is you can replace that energy consumption with information that we send over the internet in special ways, and that is much lower energy cost to get the same result.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And Nigel, I don't know if you'd want to sort of contribute to that.
Well, I mean, it is a fascinating area, because one of the things which it kind of leans against proof of stake is the fact that a lot of people have invested a lot of time and a lot of energy in proof of work type products. So having people turn up and say, do you know what, we're just going to magically invent this currency in thin air, and you have to trust me that it's real currency, and we'll use proof of stake as a way of conducting the transactions, is going to be a hard sell to a lot of people, I think, because effectively what you're coming up with is imaginary money. I mean, it's all imaginary money, right? But it's effectively saying we've just got a pool of, we're going to have a fixed pool of currency, thank you very much, believe me. But actually, if you think about it, traditionally that's how currency works anyway. If you look at a fiat currency, the fact is, since we lost the gold standard, and since and then the silver standard, it's just imaginary, and it's a collective belief that this stuff exists, and all governments do is just say, we've now created a bit more, and we believe them. So actually, in many ways, I think that if we can get over the fact that people have invested a lot of time, energy, and literal energy in proof of work systems, then proof of stake makes a lot of sense going forward, and the type of thing that you're describing, Colin, is definitely the direction. I think technologically it makes sense, and environmentally it makes sense as well.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'm sorry, Colin, but I'm just conscious that we're getting very close to the end, and there are a few questions. That we have. I mean, if we deal with the questions and we still have 1 or 2 minutes, I'll give you the opportunity to respond to Nigel or to add to what he said. Yeah, so the first question that I can see here is, let's see, actually for some reason I can't actually see. Let's see.
Would you like me to read the questions out?
Oh yes, I've seen. I can see them now. Thanks. Well, there are quite a few. Okay, so I'll just scroll up. Sorry, bear with me 1 minute. Okay. So I've got a question here, and somebody's asking that they wanted, we may have covered this a bit, but I'll just sort of mention it. Somebody's asking, wanting to find out how fintech can contribute to the energy sector. So solar coins, can they help in digitalizing sustainable finance? And I think maybe actually Colin would want to expand it just a bit, because you've mentioned a bit about what Nano does, and I think sort of Nano sort of comes in here. So what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they probably can, but not any more than any business that is trying to do environmentally friendly things. I think it was kind of a fad. It still is a bit of a fad to attach a coin to every single idea that's out there and then now declare it's on blockchain. But I think we've already covered that that's not actually a long-term strategy. So I think, yeah, they can. They don't need blockchain to do it. They definitely don't need their own coin to do it. And yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, and there's a specific question here for Colin, actually. And he says that Nano as a technology is equal for all being decentralized and uncensorable. Considering recent current affairs talking about sanctions and removing certain groups' access to payments networks for good reasons, what consideration does Nano Foundation take from a foundation perspective, and also in considering the network? So I think
it sounds like what they're asking is, you know, we have the ability to shut off access, you know, to these banking areas and specific things for possibly entirely good reasons. I guess the worry would be that they're not for good reasons. And then how does that affect cryptocurrency and, you know, what we're doing? So it is a change in what we're doing, but I think if we tie that back to the conversation we had earlier about the traceability, and Nano is the same way. I think it's a different way to do it, and I think, you know, we should teach, and we do talk with, you know, law enforcement and governments about how this technology works, because they'll have to adapt it in their processes. I think it is a change. I think that the benefits of having everyone in the world have access to the economic system effectively outweighs, you know, these one-off scenarios, you know, where we can actually find, you know, people that shouldn't be having the money, you know, maybe they're fraudsters, or maybe it's a terror group or something. But once again, there's 2 billion people in the world that don't have access to the bank because of this system that we have. So it's a different way to do it, and it'll take new methods to deal with it.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in on that? Because
yes, Nigel, 2 minutes, please.
Okay, sorry. Okay, yeah, this is not a new problem. I was involved in one of the very first kind of cashless payment systems called Mondex, which was actually run by NatWest back in the early 90s, and in Swindon. So they actually chose Swindon as like the perfect average town, and people had contactless devices which enabled them to pass cash from one person to another, and it was done in a completely decentralized way. It was the first time it had ever been done. And the wallets that people had could contain unlimited amounts of money. And in the end, they had to restrict them, because what they found was the major users of Mondex in Swindon were drug dealers, because they could actually pass money seamlessly and carry huge amounts of money around. So all I would say is I think there is a major ethical issue with crypto still, because, you know, we can cut SWIFT off because we know that Russian money is coming from Russia. But what are effectively anonymous transactions through Bitcoin, you know, and that's why Silk Road did so well. So I still think that there are interesting ethical problems that we need to try and overcome before we make it a completely mainstream idea, notwithstanding the access to payment thing for the, you know, people who can't currently get in. I completely agree with you, Colin. So was that 2 minutes, Ewa? There you go.
It was more, but do you know what? I think we need to actually organize another event just on that topic alone. Raises a lot of issues, I'd say.
Yeah.
But the next question says, behavioral monitoring solutions will help reduce identity fraud. Customers always fall victim, and even where there's a connivance. So regulators need to sort of protect them. So I think that question would be for you, Nigel.
Yeah, well, I think it probably goes back to something that I was saying earlier, really, around the fact that, you know, there are ways of protecting identity, particularly in and around call centers. So we are better able now to verify people using things like voice and video and so on. But we shouldn't be over reliant on it. And again, you know, that we should be looking at using different factors of authentication. You know, I think, you know, really simple one actually is there's no standardized way of authenticating an individual using a second pass of authentication. You know, we spoke about SMS and the problems with SMS earlier, but actually, if we insisted that every single interaction that you have with a financial institution over the phone had to have a second factor authentication, which was a secure one, we would massively cut down on this type of fraud. If we did the same with insurance companies, if you phone up to make an insurance claim, you have to use a verified form of second factor authentication before you're allowed to do it. It takes it out of the hands of the agent then, because actually what you're doing a lot of the time is pushing identity management onto agents, and actually they're not qualified to deal with that. So we could do a hell of a lot more, and actually very simply, I think, as well.
So again, it will be about education now, but educating the industry.
Yeah, I mean, and that might have to be regulation. I mean, you might actually have to regulate the industries to say, you know,
Yes.
you cannot have any form of interaction without some form of strong second or third factor authentication.
Yes, yes, I see. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And just going through the questions. And I've got a very interesting question here. What are the current key regulatory challenges and priorities facing the financial services industry? And Nigel, I'd ask you to take that. So what are the current key challenges, regulatory challenges and priorities facing the financial services? I'd say the fintech industry, obviously fintech being very broad now, because I think financial services is quite broad in itself. So maybe some of the services that we've spoken about.
That I muted myself. Hopefully you can still hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think, sorry, it's actually, believe it or not, it's moved me onto a different microphone. So hopefully I don't sound ridiculous.
Sounds good.
Right. Great. Yeah, I'm back here. That's really strange. Sorry. Yeah. So, I mean, Brexit, for example, has caused all sorts of upset because we're actually in danger of diverging from a regulatory perspective from some of our closest trading partners. We saw things like MiFID II coming in Europe, which has completely changed the way for things like kind of data retention and that type of stuff, and the way in which we transact business. I think the biggest regulatory obstacles at the moment actually are the fact that we are well behind in regulation in terms of regulating some of the more novel technologies, and I'm not one to try and stomp on kind of blockchain type currency technologies, but I think we're taking a dead heavy-handed approach to it at the moment. What we're trying to say is effectively we don't understand it, so we need to try and control it completely. So it's a really wide, I mean, that's a whole seminar in itself in terms of current regulatory challenges. But I said my biggest one, as I say, my biggest fear is that we end up diverging here in the UK from the rest of the world and from the rest of Europe, which is actually going to make it challenging for us to do cross-border business.
Yeah, I would have had a follow-up on that, but I'll go through the questions. If we have time, I'll follow up on that point that you made. There's a question here which says, with increasing frauds, will blockchain technology help improve trust and transparency in social tech? But I think it would be, I think we kind of covered that a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Short answer, probably not.
Yes, I think we covered that. So let's see. And then there are smaller comments here on the there's a question here that says, can technology help with first-time fraudsters? I'm not quite sure what this question is about, but
I can answer that one. Actually,
brilliant.
Sorry, I know you're exactly where that's coming from. I was talking earlier about using biometric identity to find known fraudsters. I think what this is talking about is, how do you detect unknown fraudsters? How do you get the person coming in for the first time?
Yes.
And that is actually where technology is really beginning to emerge now, because that's about looking for behavioral cues, some of the things I spoke about earlier in terms of, you know, how long does it take you to answer a factual question? You know, how often do you say for example? Here am I umming my way through something. Because it's using those types of things, and actually it's the first time fraudster is the one that you really want to get, because they're the ones who are, you know, until you know they're a fraudster, you can't catch them the second time. So use of linguistic technology, use of behavioral technology is where we're going to begin to identify those people in call center type of environments.
Brilliant. And just following on that, the extent, I wondered though, Nigel, the extent to which you're engaging with regulators, so regulators such as the FCA, you know, and other regulators on this, to find out, well, to bring on board some of the technologies that you've spoken about in helping to deal with the fraudulent activities that you've spoken about. You know, how do you engage regulators, or how have you engaged regulators? Are you having conversations? Are there ongoing conversations on this, or do you feel that this is not happening?
I feel so. I'll be brutally frank on this, and I know this is being recorded, but actually we don't see nearly enough interaction from regulators. Unfortunately, they're often many years behind where the technology is and where the problem is. We had there was a problem a number of years ago in on the trading floor. So for large banks, you've got people on the phone all the time, where mobile phone recording was introduced, and the regulations were introduced based on technology which didn't exist. But the regulators who brought it in believed what was effectively a publicity piece by a company who hoped at some point in a few years' time to introduce this. So I don't feel that historically there's been enough engagement from regulators with companies, particularly companies in the same jurisdiction. I mean, we are a British fintech firm specializing in fraud and related types of things. You know, we don't have that type of engagement. That said, just yesterday I was involved in a discussion about new standards in AI, which was sponsored by Tech UK. So we actually had fantastic interaction with government, and Tech UK, I would say, are one of the best sponsors of technology and innovation in this country. But that doesn't always work its way into the regulators, who are generally more talking to the people that they're enforcing against rather than the people who can help with the enforcement.
And I wonder though if what could help here would be maybe to, you know, sort of align with some of the tech sprints and events that you know, organizations or regulators like the FCA actually have. Maybe that would be you know, an ideal forum to actually, you know, come and really talk about the solutions that can actually help cater or deal with fraud, particularly as it relates to, you know, financial services. And you spoke indeed about your contributions in the insurance space here. I wonder though if that would be the right forum to introduce these very useful solutions that you've spoken about, because I think there's a need, a great need to actually, a great need and contribution that can actually be had just engaging with some of the approaches that, for example, the UK FCA has on these issues. Yeah,
unfortunately, vendors are not always welcome, and that's the problem. You see, we're often seen as people just trying to sell our technology, you know, and actually most of the time it's, you know, I'm a law and technology enthusiast, you know, and the reason I formed the company was to solve solutions that I could see a real issue to. The reason Colin does what Colin does, I'm sure, is because he's enthusiastic about what underpins the product, not about the product itself. It's about, you know, we want to contribute, but often we're just seen as people who are just trying to flog products.
Yeah, it is a bit of a catch-22, because you want the regulations to be up to date on the latest technology, and the people that know the latest technology are the people selling the technology. But that also has problems. We have fairly good discussions with some regulators, but it is hard. We're a small nonprofit writing open source software. And then some of these organizations that are very, very large get, you know, more direct audiences because of optics and that type of thing. So it does happen. It can improve, but yeah, there's no perfect answer on it.
Okay, well, thank you so much on that. I'd probably follow up elsewhere, sort of with you, Nigel, actually on that. Yes, but thank you so much. And at this point, I think we've got just under 1 minute left. At this point, I'd like to say a really big thank you to both Nigel Cannings and to Colin Lumahio for engaging or participating in our first first Center of FinTech Roundtable event. Thank you so much. So again, my name is Dr. Iwasalami, and I am the interim co-director of the Center of FinTech, along with Dr. Julie Wall. So thank you so much for today, and thank you also for attending. Would hope to see you at our future events. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.